Good afternoon. Last November, many of us who are gathered here today celebrated in the same room the 30th anniversary of the Education Reform Act of 1982. At that panel, we applauded the courage and determination of public officials who passed that historic act. Today, we recognize, as the Pulitzer Prize Committee did 30 years ago, that it was not only public officials whose determination led to the Education Reform Act and the reform in Mississippi. This legislation was successful also because of the results of others, including journalists on this stage who were guided by a deep sense of civic responsibility and by considerations of the public good. And we are deeply grateful for the work that you all did at that time. I'm Rob Perigin, president of Millsaps College, and I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon as we mark the 30th anniversary of the Pulitzer Prize, and won by the Clarion-Ledger. We even have an opportunity to see the medal, right? Good. This prize was awarded for public service, and today we also reflect on important questions about journalism and the media in the 21st century. So we'll be looking back as well as looking forward. It's our privilege at Millsaps to be in the presence of so many who were so involved at that time and who were leaders and public servants of this state and this nation who were so influential then. We at Millsaps take public service and community engagement seriously. Our new strategic plan, entitled Across the Street and Around the Globe, Partnerships and Influence at Millsaps College, builds on our location here in the heart of this capital city of Mississippi and on the college's historical role in advancing freedom of speech, freedom of thought, social justice, and reflection on life's most important questions. The strategic plan challenges us not only to send our students into the community to learn, to engage, and to serve, but also to develop opportunities here on campus to be a public square, a modern-day agora of sorts, where students, citizens, community leaders, and others can reflect collectively. We at Millsaps believe that all students, indeed all citizens, can benefit by celebrating together past victories, discussing current existing challenges, and exploring future opportunities. So we're honored today to have this conversation and all of you with us. Indeed, I'm pleased to announce very briefly today that Millsaps will continue to be a place where matters of public significance are discussed, in part because of the generosity of anonymous donors, a husband and wife, who were so inspired by the Education Reform Act panel in November that they left that panel, called me that afternoon and said, I'd like to talk with you. They came to my office the next week and said, we want to establish an endowment, and we're going to fund a $100,000 endowment at the Community Foundation of Jackson in order that Millsaps can continue to have these kinds of events and be a place for important discussion, matters of importance of the day to be discussed. They were deeply touched by that experience and said they want to help ensure that we can continue that. I also want to say, and some of you know this, but in creating that endowment, they said we want to honor two giants of this state who have been so involved and so important to us in important progressive issues of the day. And so they named the endowment in honor of Elise and William Winter. Thank you, too, for being such an inspiration to us all and for inspiring these donors to make this magnificent gift. Wherever they may be, if in this room or not, I want to thank them publicly and say how much we appreciate their generosity in recognizing you. I'm also grateful to Charles Overby, who will be moderating today's discussion and who is responsible for this panel in more ways than one. Without his leadership as executive editor of the Clarion-Ledger in 1982, there probably would have been no Pulitzer Prize to celebrate today. And it was also Charles who, not long ago at a birthday party for Governor Winter, mentioned the possibility of holding this event. So we're very happy to do this, and Millsaps awarded Charles an honorary degree last May, so we're pleased to have him among our alumni ranks as well. I'm pleased to have you here today, welcome you, and welcome your colleagues from the days gone by. And of course, there would be no Pulitzer Prize to celebrate today if it were not for the conviction and commitment and dedication of Governor William Winter, also an honorary degree recipient of Millsaps College. So thank you, Governor Winter, for your work on education reform, Thank you for your commitment to making Mississippi the best it can be. Thank you for being such an inspiration to us all. Now let me introduce Governor Winter. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for letting Elise and me have a part in these proceedings today. Millsaps College has for us, as it has for all Mississippians, been a kind of oasis of intellectual and cultural leadership, and we are grateful to you for that tradition that you are upholding in your administration as the president of this great college. Thank you for hosting this event today. This is a significant day. It, I hope, will be the basis for our remembering where we've come from in terms of the beginning of the process of improving education in the state of Mississippi. I think I can say this without anybody being able to contradict me. I owe Charles Overby, the Clarion-Ledger, Gannett, and all of you who have been associated with that newspaper. I owe you more than anybody else in this state. Let me set the stage. I'm going to do this very briefly. Let me set the stage. It was June 1982. The boys of Spring and I had not had a very good legislative session. We had been denied almost everything that we had asked the legislature to pass in that session. And it would be an understatement to say that we were dismayed. We didn't know where we were going. But what we had taken some satisfaction and hope from was the fact that there was at the Clarion-Ledger in those early months of 1982 a new regime. The old Hetterman regime had passed on, and the Clarion-Ledger was now beginning to assert a more enlightened leadership under the editorship of Ray Hetterman. And then all of a sudden, Ray Hetterman and the Hetterman family sold the Clarion-Ledger to this carpetbag Gannett outfit from up north. And they sent down here to run the paper, to be the executive editor of the paper, the chairman of the Republican Party in Tennessee. Things couldn't get any better. We just couldn't get any worse. We'd just been denied everything we'd asked for in the legislature. And just as the Clarion-Ledger was beginning to be helpful, here we go backwards. And then there showed up a man named Charles Overby. And he let me know from the very first day that the Clarion-Ledger was going to be committed to the promotion of good things in Mississippi, leading with education, public education. And that's what he did. And he assigned, almost immediately, he assigned his best reporters, Fred Anklam and Nancy Weaver and others on the staff of the Clarion-Ledger, to spend that summer and that fall promoting the Education Reform Act that we had been denied by the legislature that spring. And the rest of it is history, and you'll hear from it now. But I want to say to Charles, to his colleagues, to all of you from the Clarion-Ledger who turned it around. I was a has-been governor. I was not only a lame duck, I was a failed governor. The columnists were writing, Bill Minor was writing, saying, Winter, well, he's such a disappointment. He just hadn't done anything. And suddenly we had the ally of Charles Overby and the Clarion-Ledger. And we won that battle. And Charles, I will always be personally indebted to you for making me a bit better governor than I might have been otherwise. And that's not saying a lot, but to thank you for the support you gave my administration, the Boys of Spring who made it possible, and so many of you who worked all over this state to make it possible to pass that act, all of Mississippi and future Mississippians owe you and your colleagues a great debt of gratitude that has now been recognized, that was recognized then and continues to be recognized now as one of the significant journalistic feats in Mississippi by being the recipient of the Pulitzer Prize. Thank you so much. Thank all of you for the role that you've had, and thank all of you for the support that you've given public education in Mississippi. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Governor Winter, I think, for most of those comments. You know, it's really kind of embarrassing 30 years later to hear the esteemed governor say how concerned he was that I was coming down here from Tennessee to be the editor. I wasn't really aware of that concern at the time, but I do remember being asked about my political affiliation up there in Tennessee, and so I said I'm a journalist mainly, and so I said straightforwardly and truthfully from my judgment that I saw no difference between a William Winter Democrat and a Lamar Alexander Republican. And I managed to make both states mad in the process. You know, I always felt that it was a shame that Governor Winter's name was not on that Pulitzer Prize. Now, let me tell you, I got it here somewhere. I went down to the Clarion-Ledger today, one, just to see if they would let me in the door. Because, you know, 30 years, they forget in a hurry. But I called in advance and said, I want to come pick up the gold medal and have it for the day. I didn't know whether they charged me rent on it or whether they even let me have it, but they did. And so this is the Pulitzer Prize Gold Medal for Distinguished Public Service that was awarded in 1983, that so many people in this room had something to do with. I've always thought it was a shame that William Winter's name was not on this medal. Clarion-Ledger's name is on this medal, but William Winter's name is not on it. And in preparation for today's event, I just went to the Pulitzer website. I'm not sure I've ever done that before. Well, they didn't even have a website 30 years ago. There wasn't a web that anybody knew about. So I went to the website and looked at the whole list of Pulitzer Prize winners over the years. And of course, my eye went to 1983, and it went right to that Public Service Award. And to my pleasure, I saw what they have on the website. It says 1983 to the Clarion-Ledger for its successful campaign supporting Governor Winter in his legislative battle for reform of Mississippi's public education. So William Winter's name is attached to this Pulitzer Prize. You know, more important than being on the gold medal, for all the public to see, William Winter's name is there. David Cruz and I had an interview earlier today talking about some of the things that went on in connection with this Pulitzer Prize. And we had some great stories. Before we get into hearing from the panel, I want to thank publicly Dr. Rob Perrigan for Millsaps' interest in education reform 30 years ago, in this Pulitzer effort 30 years ago. Most people don't care anything about what happened 30 years ago, if you get right down to it. And if it didn't involve themselves, they certainly don't care about it. And for Millsaps and Rob, for you to care about that moment in time and to bring it back here that we can celebrate it, look at it, turn it around from several perspectives, and then say, hey, maybe we could do this again. Try to re-inspire for another 30 years. I think is really special, and it's wonderful that Millsaps cares this much. So all of us are grateful that Millsaps would do this. But before I introduce our panelists, I do want to recognize a few people associated with the Pulitzer team in one way or another who are not up here at the table. You'll see Nancy Weaver Teichert's name on the program. She was the investigative reporter who went out and did a 6-month survey along with Fred Anklam of the sorry state of education in Mississippi. She broke her ankle last week and is unable to be here. Cliff Trines was one of the 2 legislative reporters, along with Fred, who is not able to be here. Lee Cornell was the city editor. I said yesterday at a tribute service for him, he took spaghetti, mainly Fred's story that went on forever. He took this mass of spaghetti and made some sense out of it. And his daughter, Lee, died a few months ago. We recognized him yesterday in tribute. We'll remember him today in tribute. Gretchen, we're glad you're here. Jimmy Johnson, cartoonist for the Clarion-Ledger, the Daily News and Clarion-Ledger, had some wonderful, really striking cartoons. He couldn't be with us. 2 special people who could not be with us, who never wrote a word or edited a word, a copy, but were central to the Pulitzer effort. Ken Andrews, the publisher of the Clarion-Ledger and Daily News, who withstood lots of criticism from the business community and from others, but never wavered in his support of what we were doing. He couldn't be here. And John Johnson, who was the managing editor of the Jackson Daily News, died a number of years ago, and he put together the Pulitzer effort. And if anybody thinks you can just write the stories and ship them up to New York and have the judges think it's worth a Pulitzer, guess again. He put together magnificent entry, and so we thank him today. But today we're going to look back briefly. Well, maybe not so briefly. We've been carrying on here for a while. But we're also going to look ahead. You know, Rob mentioned that we did have an education reform panel here a few months ago, and we looked at the future of education reform. Today, I think we're going to try to look at the future of journalism, future of newspapers, as well as looking back. And I hope as we look at the future, we can try to answer the question, can newspapers continue to communicate big ideas to their readers and to the public? Because that's really what the Pulitzer effort was all about, communicating a big idea. The work that was done to achieve education, help achieve education reform, was recorded in this 80-page tabloid after the fact called Miracle in Mississippi. And when we started, this was not a Pulitzer Prize-winning effort. It was an education reform winning effort. And after it was all over, we said, hey, well, maybe that, some people said to us, maybe it ought to be considered for a Pulitzer Prize. So our prize really was the education reform and the better education for children. But the work that was done, I believe, represented unprecedented commitment by a Mississippi newspaper to education. There were 51 stories and 27 editorials in 24 days. This was the story of how Mississippi decided to change its destiny. It was a story of how thousands of Mississippi children, many still unborn, will be allowed to go to improved schools and find improved opportunities. It was simply the story of a miracle in Mississippi. And so our panelists are going to talk about that. We've got a great panel here today, and in no particular order of character or professional achievement, but all of them are both characters and professional achievers. Bill Nichols was on the staff of the Clarion-Ledger. He was in the Southern Style section. And you know, great thing about the Clarion-Ledger was the front page had all the important stuff and interesting stuff, but you could read that paper from front to back, had some great stories in it. Bill Nichols now is the managing editor of Politico in Washington. Next to him is Brian Tolley. Brian is the executive editor of the Clarion-Ledger now. he's faced with trying to do what we did with about half the resources. So we'll hear from him. Ronnie Agnew, he was the executive editor of the Clarion-Ledger for a lot more years than I was, and now he's the executive director of Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and he brings a perspective of both print and broadcasting. Rick Cleveland, one of the great storytellers of all times, certainly ought to be on a panel to talk about whether newspapers can communicate ideas. He was the sports editor and sports columnist for the Clarion-Ledger, and now he's the executive director of the Mississippi Sports Hall of Fame. Fred Anklam, I've already mentioned more times than anybody else. It's because there was a three-pronged effort. There was the investigative report on education, there was the legislative coverage, and there was the editorials. And Fred was involved in two of those three things. He's now the operations editor of USA Today. And then Pat Mitchell is here. Pat brings together not only a distinguished journalistic career, but as the director of student media at Ole Miss, she also is responsible for the business side as well as the journalistic side. So she's our our business side person who's going to tell us how we can have a good business model for all the new stuff that's going on. So let's start with Fred. Fred, it kind of seems so natural now, but what was the biggest challenge you had in the first part of this when you were trying to define why Mississippi was last in education?
Well, I don't know, Charles, that I was just a reporter, and my editors came in and said, you and Nancy, go out there and find out why Mississippi education is so bad, basically. It was a straight reporting assignment. They said, now what was different about this is they said, take the time you need and investigate everything. So we first sat down and just had a list of things to discuss and think about. Nancy was new. She had done many investigative pieces, and I was just excited to be working with her. I had been the education writer, so I was familiar with things like school funding, how the disparities were across the state, and the fact that we had no compulsory school attendance law in Mississippi at that time. That we did not have, I think one school district had funded kindergartens, and that was it in the entire state. So if you wanted to have your children go to kindergarten, you had to pay out of your own pocket or to some private place. And then teacher salaries and school test score performance, and you just went through the litany of things. So the challenge for us was just getting the answers to these questions, which, as you said, took us 6 months. And as we went along the way, of course, we found other things that needed to be explored that we hadn't even thought of at the beginning when we started. And new programs started out. There was a reading assistant or reading aid program that the Tupelo schools were doing. And we went and wrote about this because I did it somewhat reluctantly because I saw it as a way that the legislature could avoid funding kindergartens because they could instead say, we'll pick these kids up when they get to first grade and have a reading assistant. So I was kind of a little nervous about even writing about a program that was successful and very good for the children.
And as you recall, that's exactly what the House subcommittee did.
That's exactly what happened the very first day. I've gone back and looked at it, and I think Cliff and I wrote a story the first day that said the governor's kindergarten program seems pretty dead, but reading aids is the big, exciting prospect for everybody. And to me, what was great about this entire project was spending the time having the luxury, which many newspapers today don't have that luxury, of taking two, I think, pretty talented reporters, turning them loose for 6 months. My wife, Sissy, remembers loading me up with Nancy in the car, and we would disappear for 4 or 5 days and come back having interviewed people, all the way from the coast up north. So we went all over the state, and we talked to private school folks, public school folks. We talked to everybody on all sides. Folks who are active in teacher education programs at all the major universities. And what was fun for me was after we got the whole project together, then the governor had decided to move forward with his special session and being able to cover that myself as well. But for the start of it, it was, for us, as you said, this was not hey, how are we going to win a Pulitzer this year? It was, hey, here's an important issue. The governor has tried a couple times and failed to get the state legislature to do anything. So what should people know? What should the readers know? What should our voters know about this issue? And why is it so hard for Mississippi to pull itself up?
So Fred and Nancy had this terrific investigative series that was prepared and done. But when we learned that the special session was going to be in December, we held it. We decided that it's just like a campaign. It has peaks and valleys, and so you don't want to put all this good stuff out in advance and then people forget it.
Now, that's the politician speaking. We as reporters were sure this was never going to get printed. The longer you hold on to it, the stuff's getting old. And
right,
Charles, you got to put this in the paper.
I really got a bunch of pushback from Fred and Nancy, but I understood the legislative process. I thought I did, and that they needed to be prodded. And this, we kicked this off just before the special session began, and so in the course of this, and then afterwards, particularly, I've been criticized personally, and the Clarion-Ledger has been criticized as having colluded with William Winter and the Boys of Spring, that there was too much closeness between the two, and that objectivity went out the window. And this is the wrong thing for a newspaper to do. And so repeatedly, I was criticized and continue to be criticized as being too close to William Winter. And I was thinking about that today, and I said, you know, that wouldn't be a bad thing to have on your tombstone. Too close to William Winter. Yeah, so tell Andrea when I pass on, say, he was too close to William Winter. I'll take that. So then we get to the second part, the legislative coverage. And I think it has been said by others that it was the most intensive coverage of the legislature ever. And so, Fred, your reporting was so important in that. Tell us why it was different from previous legislative coverage, and just set the scene for us a little bit.
Well, I think before we'd probably write about legislation when it was on the floor of the House or the Senate. We didn't pay much attention to what went on in committees. And those of you who know and study political science, a lot of things don't ever get to be voted on. They never make it to the floor. And so in this time, we decided that we would track in both houses every step of the way where the legislation went. Now, it was easier because it was a special session. There was only one topic. And so it was pretty easy for us to keep our eyes on the ball. But I would say we wrote in almost excruciating detail. We were at subcommittee levels and naming the names of these 8 senators and subcommittees. 5 of them voted to take kindergartens out of the bill. 3 said keep it in. So they passed the bill to the next committee, but they stripped the kindergartens out, and we named them. And then I think, to my surprise, the editorial page, which I think you had already planned all along, but the editorial page started weighing in, which really was very interesting to observe. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little.
Yeah, I'll say something about that. Did I mention Dave Harden when I was talking about the people who aren't here? Dave Harden is one of the people I meant to mention. He was the editorial page editor, and he wrote most of the editorials. And he came up with the idea of the Hall of Shame. And the legislators who voted against education were put in this Hall of Shame. And the ones who were put in there tried to brag about it and wore these ribbons saying Hall of Shame. But we editorially said we hope they'll wear those before Election Day so everybody can see them. But on the beginning of that special session, there was an editorial that we wrote that said, the overriding question is this: will rank and file legislators speak out in this special session, or will they cower in the corner and let a few bullheaded leaders make the rest of the legislature look bad? If these are legislators who don't understand the urgency or sensibility of that call, then it is high time the public knew them by name. And so news-wise and editorial-wise, we began to call them out. You know, Governor Winter, everything about Governor Winter is nice. Governor Winter is nice. He's not going to call anybody out. That's why his education reform got beat twice before. Now, you know, and the boys of spring, they weren't quite as nice, but they were pretty nice. It's hard when you work with those people every day to really call them what they are. We called them what they were, and we love doing it. And it was this yes but that we tried to strip away from the legislators. Every single one of them said they were for education reform, but yes, I'm for education reform, but. And so we tried to strip that away from it, and by naming them by name, it worked. The legislature is still an anonymous process, and that's why I think it's the weakest branch of government, because there's very little personal accountability to legislators. So you've heard all this. We've kind of looked back. It passed. You know, I don't know. Did any of you on the panel, as they began the special session, think that education reform was going to pass in toto from Governor Winter? Anybody? No. I don't think anybody did. I think maybe Elise thought it would. and you know, the boys of spring are here. They're sitting there on the back row. I do want to recognize them. David Cruz, Dick Malpas, John Hennigan, Andy Mullins. They had a lot to do with the passage of the education reform. Did any of you think it was going to pass? Yeah, let's give them a hand. Which of the fabulous quartet there thought going in it was going to pass?
We were all in our 20s. We knew it was going to pass.
They-
I was in my 30s. I wasn't so sure.
David?
We went swimming out in Dick Malt's lake when we were mapping out the strategy, and I was pretty much convinced we could make that happen. He was 24.
Yeah. Well, it really was. It was suicidal for Governor Winter to recommend this. He had failed twice, and every single piece of evidence said it was going to get beat again, and why he would pound his head into the wall like that. But the boys of spring shored him up, and he wanted to do it anyway. But that commitment is what made it happen, and those town meetings all across the state built up this groundswell of support, and that made a difference. So long and short of it is the newspaper was able, working with the governor and his staff, to communicate this big idea that there could be education reform and that you could pay for it with taxes. Can you imagine today trying to get taxes? Taxes is such a dirty word. So that takes us today to whether newspapers and the media can in fact communicate big ideas. Now, Bill Nichols is doing something that's new in Washington. It's an online newspaper, but it also has an influential print component to it. I would say that today Politico is more influential than the Washington Post, which is almost unheard of that it could be. But they hired all the best people away from mainstream media. So, Bill, tell us about that, what I guess we'd call a hybrid experience, and whether you think newspapers can communicate big ideas today.
Let me quickly say yes, I do, just enthusiastically yes, and it's been one of the smart things that we did in starting Politico is that we decided early on that about the 30 people that we could convince to come to work for this thing that everyone thought was destined to fail. We split it about half and half between geezers like myself and a few others and young kids who actually understood how the new media worked. So I think helping the younger journalists understand some of those bigger ideals that drew all of us into the business, I think, was very helpful. But it was also interesting to me just in the couple of weeks before I came down here, I told several of our younger staff members what I was doing. And they, of course, had no idea that this had ever happened and were also unbelieving that there was ever a state that didn't have mandatory kindergarten and a lot of other things, much less that it was viewed as a communist plot as it was here in 1983. But that sense of idealism, and I think all of us who are on the staff, particularly the so-called outside agitators that Ray Hederman hired to come in and kind of shake things up. People thought we were crazy to come to a place like Mississippi. There were times that I thought I was crazy to come to a place like Mississippi. But what I wasn't prepared for was to find people like Governor Winter and the Boys of Spring and the people who stayed here and tried to change things. And it was an unbelievably rewarding experience to be part of that. And I hope for me that's become a part of my sort of journalistic identity. Anyway, I'll answer Charles's question. One of the cool things about Politico is we were born 6 years ago at a time when the thought was that the media was dying and there was no way to forestall that death. And also, more importantly, that original journalism on the web had no future. People just wanted aggregation, they wanted links, they wanted opinion, and the last thing they wanted was a 1,500-word story that actually said something serious. So we started a site that did some of those other things, but mostly wrote 1,500-word stories that say something serious. And son of a gun, people read it. And that's how we made our brand. We do a lot of other things, and hopefully there are people here who come to the site and enjoy the fun and the fast stuff that we do. But what I get up every morning to do is the serious journalism that I've enjoyed doing for now nearly 35 years. And there is an audience for it. The economics, as my friends locally here can tell you, are really, really tough. But I think the fact that we've gone from 5 years ago or 6 years ago where you couldn't even talk about a paywall to the fact that now basically everyone is employing a paywall. No, they're not making a lot of money, but I think they will ultimately. And that's where everyone in this audience has to come in, because we're all going to have to pay to continue to have the serious journalism that we all need and deserve. So I absolutely think that we can continue to communicate big ideas. We do it every day. You have to do it an awful lot faster than we did in 1983. You have to work an awful lot harder than we did in 1983. You have to be a lot smarter with how you deploy your resources. But the audience still wants it. That hasn't changed. They read it in different ways. They want it communicated to them in different ways. But I have no doubt that if there was something this serious and you had a newspaper that was willing to put their weight behind it, and you had a governor and his staff who were willing to bet their careers on it, I think people would stand up and take notice. I may be crazy, but I really do.
Good, Bill. Thank you. You know, Bill made a reference to people looking at the Clarion-Ledger staff as like communist agitators, and we laughed about it as hyperbole, but not really. I'll tell you a quick story. A friend of mine from Tennessee was having dinner in Montana, and he found out that the couple next to them was from Mississippi. And people are nice to me. I mean, when you leave the state, it's a lot easier for people to have good thoughts about you. And so he's periodically run into people, and they'd say, oh, yeah, I know him. So he came back and said, well, I found somebody that doesn't like you. And I said, oh, really? He said, yeah, I just told him I was friends with Charles Overby. And he said, oh, that guy's a Bolshevik. And I immediately said, that would have to be one of two people, Wirt Yerger or Billy Munger. And he said, it was Wirt Yerger. So it's a big country, but it's not a big country. So, Ronnie, you now have seen it on both sides, broadcast and print. You understand the importance of media. Tell us what your views are about the future and whether it's possible in either medium to have an impact today.
Well, just like my colleagues, I think that the future is bright. I think that what we often lose sight of in looking at all the negative things that we see and hear is that there is an incredible appetite for news. There's an incredible appetite for what we offer. I think that we have not yet found that magic bullet in terms of finding the delivery system that's going to sustain us economically. But I truly believe to my core that Politico and others like it who have dedicated long-form journalism and made it a part of their staple, I see the future. You know, I got to tell you this. being on both sides of it, there's a lot of times when I cringe when I go to these national meetings. I was at the National Association of Broadcasters conference last week, and Bob Schieffer from CBS News got up and he said, we are going to have to, he's talking broadcasters, are going to have to pick up the slack because our newspaper brethren are hurting right now. And of course, as a person who spent 29 years in the newspaper industry, I'm ready to get up and fight. You know, I mean, this is my life. This is what I've done all my career. And I happen to know that every time, you know, Trent Lott used to say all the time that all he had to do before he went on the national news shows was to get up and read the Washington Post in the morning, and he knew exactly what they'd ask him. And I still believe that newspapers serve that role and have to serve that role. I still believe that newspapers have to set the community agenda, and I don't know that that role will ever change. I am very concerned that the cuts have gone so deep that I wonder about the ability, especially at the local levels, and I'm not talking just Jackson, I'm talking about around the country, whether it's possible to deliver those same kinds of, to have the patience to deliver some of the same level of content that led to the Pulitzer Prize for the Clarion-Ledger and certainly educational reform for Mississippi. How many news entities are devoting 6 months to a single story? How many folks are hammering home those editorials one after one after one, spotlighting the differences and all the problems in education? What strikes me about Mississippi is this. I'm a native all my life, and I can say this, that not only did the Pulitzer Prize set a new standard for education reform in Mississippi, it also set the debate for all the years that have happened since. It put education on the map in Mississippi. Even though we have not achieved the level of success that we need to achieve, and some of the things that we've seen at the legislative level have not been as effective as they should be, the conversation is there. And I do believe that's what newspapers do. They can set the agenda. They can get people talking about things. Even though we haven't gotten the result in Mississippi that we need to get, the conversation is here, and I do believe that only newspapers, and this is, I'm in broadcast, I'm in the broadcast world now, but only newspapers can set the agenda, unlike any other media source. And so yes, I am offended when I hear the broadcast brethren talk about we won and newspapers have lost, because I don't think we can afford to lose. Our communities are dependent on us in more ways than they've ever depended on us. We have to make sense of everything for them. We have to provide the context across the board on any number of subjects, from education to politics to everything else. They're counting on us. And if we want to give up and throw in the towel and say that the model is broken, and you know, we have to fix the model. Look at the numbers, and I've studied them like a student. Basically, print advertising has gone from about $60 billion at its peak to about $38 billion. Well, you have to make changes based on that. But you know, that does not mean that you have to give up. There are things that you can do. You can prioritize your coverage, but you have to be able to choose those franchise areas that are important to you and make them your own. But I just tell you, when I sit in the room and I hear people ready to throw in the towel, ready to quit because of the platforms have changed, delivery methods have changed, then it upsets me greatly. And when I see those broadcasters, I stand up loud and I cheer for newspapers, because we have to succeed. There is no choice.
Great, Ronnie, thank you. Brian Tolley, you just heard what your predecessor, Ronnie Agnew, said. You got half the resources that we had in 1982. Have you got a chance of making an impact with the Clarion-Ledger today?
Well, let me just say, Ronnie made me want to get up and go do something. That was a great speech. Absolutely. And along the same lines, you know, we constantly talk about the greater good. That is our mission. So we always talk about how can we make the community a better place. And the key, and what I loved about what you folks did 30 years ago, was too many media organizations just talk about problems, talk about things that they see that are wrong, and they don't talk about solutions. And I think that was what you guys did, and what we try to do is to talk about solutions and help start that conversation. But yes, we have fewer people, but Ronnie was right. You know, the key to that is we talk constantly about the front end of what stories we're going to go try to tell, what we're going to try to do. The hardest part for journalists to do, because everybody's got a good story, everybody's got important issues, is we do have to let go of some things. It comes down to quality, I think. Not doing superficial, just touching things and moving on. It takes a focus, and it takes what people are really looking for, quality content, smart, intelligent, complex, contextual information, and I think that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Brian. Pat Mitchell, you oversee the web, you oversee broadcasting, you oversee the newspaper. You're responsible for the business side as well as the journalism side. Is there a model that can work today?
Let me just say Pat Thompson. I'm sorry, Charles.
Pat Mitchell. I know Pat Mitchell. She
I know
used to be
you-
head
I
of
know you-
PBS in Washington.
That's all right. That's all right.
Pat Thompson.
Well, I certainly don't have the magic bullet that everybody's been kind of mentioning today. What I do see, and I certainly agree with Bill and Ronnie, I think newspapers have to pursue these big ideas and work to improve their communities. I'm surrounded with bright, talented students every day who still want to go into journalism. They're still interested in print journalism. There probably aren't as many of them today as there used to be, but they are committed, and part of our challenge at a journalism school is to educate them to want to tell these kinds of stories we're talking about today. And we do that both at student media as well as with the journalism school. We're doing okay in terms of print advertising, but like everybody else, it certainly declined substantially. But we have students who put on a live daily TV newscast, and we get 100 students every year to try out for about 20 spots. We have a commercially licensed radio station. We have a yearbook, and then the Daily Mississippian is still a daily newspaper. At some point, we might have to scale back a little bit and not publish the print product every day, but then be very, very smart about what we're doing on the website. And one of the big advantages of working at a university is that we can experiment with a lot of these kinds of new ideas. And we are educating all of our students in multiple platform journalism because, when I was in college, all I had to do was report and write, do it well, and that was kind of all I needed to do. Well, now that's not enough. They have to learn how to do so many other kinds of things in order to be marketable. But you can teach those skills. You want to have just smart kids who care about the community, who are critical thinkers, who know how to ask good questions, how to hold people accountable. And I really strongly believe that it's still up to newspapers to do that kind of job.
Pat, as you know, at Ole Miss, there's a group of students doing in-depth reports that are then made available to daily newspapers. Do you think that's a model that might be for the future?
Absolutely, and there are a number of universities who are, it's kind of called the teaching hospital kind of model, where there's so much good work being done in the journalism classes that never sees the light of day. So this is a way to get that work out into newspapers, on websites, onto broadcast stations as well.
Thank you. Rick, you told a lot of good stories over the years in the newspaper, and you're a wise person. You think beyond sports. You think about newspapers overall. You love newspapers. We've had many conversations about that. What you're thinking about the future now?
Well, Charles, first let me say that when I looked at the list of the panelists today, I thought that I was probably on here because I was the social chairman of the Pulitzer Prize celebration party.
He did a really good
He
job,
did a
too.
fantastic.
If I could tell one quick story, we had the party on the second floor of George Street, and
This is 30 years ago you're talking about.
yeah, 30 years ago, and we were waiting for Charles to get there, and he got up to the top of the stairs, took one look around, and turned around and went back down.
That was no place for a Baptist Sunday school teacher.
Yeah. The other point I wanted to make, and you haven't brought this up, Charles, and you wouldn't, but a big part, I was watching from the sidelines, but you were playing a big role in what was going on in the sports department at the time at the Clarion-Ledger. Charles was the great encourager He was the guy that made, when he talks about the paper and you would pick it up and read it from the front page to the back page, it was because of Charles. And he was just such a joy to work for because he was so encouraging. You never considered failing because of Charles. And I want to make that point. As far as the future, I grew up in a house in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where we took 5 daily newspapers. 2 of them no longer exist. One of them prints 3 days a week. And the others have been cut back. And my hometown newspaper, the Hattiesburg American, has a for sale sign in the front yard, in front of it. I mean, that hurts. That hurts. Yeah, I'm worried. I'm real worried about the future, and what I think the future is for journalism, for newspapers, it is in community ownership of newspapers. I think local ownership that cares about the community. That's my opinion. I mean, I don't, and I love the people I work with in Jackson. I think Brian is doing a great job with what he has to work with at the Clarion-Ledger. Ronnie did a great job, but it got harder and harder and harder to do because of the cutbacks that we had. And so I think the future of newspapers is in an ownership that cares about the community and not about pleasing stockholders.
You know, it's really interesting to see how the circle comes, because 31 years ago, when Gannett came in and replaced the local ownership, there were a lot of people who were hopeful. There were some people who were discouraged maybe, but there were people who were hopeful that it was going to go beyond one family rule and that a public ownership would allow for more of a public stewardship. And I gave a lot of speeches around the country because I saw it in Nashville and I saw it in Jackson, where it did take away that one-person rule and open up, democratize, if you will, the newsrooms. And now here we are. You heard what Rick said. I do believe the pendulum's going to swing back toward local ownership because there are people in a local community who will pay more than probably the newspaper is valued on Wall Street today. Now you're going to get the same thing you had before. You're going to have the uncertainties of local ownership and the eccentricities of local ownership, but you'll have a commitment as well. So I think that's going to happen. I want us to have an opportunity for just a few questions or observations. Hope you'll keep them short. The easiest way to do this is to stand up to the microphone. Lane, you lead us off.
First of all, I want to say thanks to everyone here today. It's been an outstanding program. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to educate you all, if I may, just a few more points about the industry in the state today.
Tell the good perspective from which you bring these points.
Well, I work for the industry. I work for the folks that own the newspapers in this state. That includes corporate entities and some of the eccentric local owners that, that have been mentioned. But I did want to say that I believe in what Bill's doing. I think we've seen the past year that the hybrid model of print and well thought out online content is working. There are headlines now. I was telling Brian earlier, there are better headlines today about the industry than there have been in the last 5 or 6 years, and I think we need to embrace that. We were very quick to embrace the negativity surrounding the industry, so I would encourage folks to be open-minded about the good news coming out. The other thing I would point out, there are still 1.5 million regular newspaper readers in the state of Mississippi, and when I mean regular, they go to the stand every day and buy a newspaper, or they have it delivered to their home. There are more newspapers, print newspapers, in the state of Mississippi today than there were 5 years ago. That's a point I like to make in any presentation that I make. It surprises a lot of people. There are 2 newspapers in Ocean Springs. Does Ocean Springs need 2 newspapers? Probably not. Don't quote me on that. But there are 2 newspapers in Ocean
Wait, are
Springs.
you saying newspaper, you're not making a distinction between daily or weekly or
No.
frequency?
The Mississippi Press Association represents 120 member newspapers. There are 17 daily newspapers. It is important to point out that that's fewer than there were just a few years ago. But there's still 90-plus weekly or non-daily newspapers in the state. And I would also submit this, Ronnie and public broadcasting exempt, but there are more or even greater disruptive technologies that are about to affect broadcast journalism, broadcast industry, than many people, I think, would realize. And that's a big consideration going forward. The newspaper industry, in a lot of ways, has proven that you can come out on the other side and have weathered the storm, and now broadcast is about to see that as well. So not really a question, but I did want to take the opportunity.
Thank you for that observation. Anybody else want to make a comment or a question? Yes, go right ahead.
My name's Chris Donald. I'm the chaplain here at Millsaps. I'm a new Mississippian. I just came here from Virginia beginning in January. Thank you for the good work that you've shared. Politico is the very first email that I look at every morning.
God bless you, sir.
Before I go to the Washington Post website.
Bless you even more.
I did some work in Richmond, Virginia, and when I was younger, the Washington Star had just closed. There were 2 newspapers in Richmond. Now there's just one, which I think that they just sold to Berkshire Hathaway, so much for local ownership. But this idea of partisanship in newspapers, I think, is something that was part of our culture. You all are talking about using the newspaper for a public good, but at the same time, it seems like there's a growth in this sort of partisanship of papers. The Star closed, but the Washington Times came along and took out a kind of more right-leaning position. Is there a future in newspapers in that sense, in that our newspapers will begin to support a particular partisan position, and is that the way to health and security?
Fred, you and Bill both see this from a national perspective. Why don't y'all both take that?
Well, certainly, historically, you're right. Many of the early newspapers in America were partisan. They were set up as organs for particular parties or for particular candidates. I think that in the modern era, we have tried to strike a balance. It's not that we don't take a partisan position on an editorial page from time to time, but we've tried to appeal to the broadest possible audience. Now, I haven't really thought about it, but why not try a newspaper that's conservative leaning and see how it does? If anybody's got the money, I'll come help you edit it or something like that. It'd be a fun experiment. I mean, it really would be, because if you look at Fox, you look at MSNBC, they have particular audiences. CNN has dropped below the 2 of them. Used to be the dominant one on broadcast. So it's an interesting idea. But, I mean, generally we try to, hold on to as many readers as we can, and we find that by being balanced and taking a stance that gives both sides of the story has served us well. And I think that's what was, particularly with things like the Pulitzer, that's for the most disinterested public service, is the way it reads in the notation about it. And so, disinterested in the sense that you're not, one side or the other, but you certainly are interested in what's going on in the communities.
Bill?
It's an interesting question, and when we started, again, 6 years ago is like a millennium in the life of the web. But this was the point at which blogs, now an almost archaic term, were really popularized, and particularly opinionated blogs. And we didn't want to do that, and people said, "You're crazy. Objective journalism is dead. People have no interest in reading that. Opinion is the way forward." So we thought that was wrong, and I feel like have been proved right. I like to say you have to practice objective journalism version 2.0 or 3.0 or 4.0. You can't be, I don't think should be, sort of reflexively he said, she said, as we once were. I think if something is a demonstrable fact, you should say that. But We have no partisan leanings. There are many people in Washington who would disagree with that on both sides of the fence, which I was taught here, in fact, by Gretchen's dad and others, that as long as people on both sides of the fence are calling you nasty names, you're doing a pretty good job. So I try to remember that on a daily basis. But it's worked for us, and can that be replicated as a universal model? I don't know. I do know that I think there are a lot of people that, amidst the clutter of the web, want something that they think at least is trying to stay between the lines. And it helps them sort of make sense of, I think, increasingly complicated and difficult lives that we all read, or we all lead. So we certainly have no plans to change, and it's worked for us.
Is there a last question or observation from anyone? Yes.
Sorry, I just want to follow up on that point a little bit, because it seems like with a lot of things, especially being with Politico, you'd be in that situation where on one side of the fence is every scientist in the world, and on the other side is people who owe money or who have taken money from big industries and something like global warming, because it seems like if tomorrow it came out that half the senators in the United States body decided that the Earth was flat, the headline would read, Senate unsure on shape of world. So where do you draw the line there? And how hard is that to do sometimes?
It's really hard, and global warming is a really good example where we still do the he said, she said, though I think there's increasingly few she's that are saying that. But we still, that's one where we feel like, while I think the science is pretty lopsided, there's still enough people who believe that there's a second view to that we need to play that a little closer to the middle. But an example that I always use is Katrina, where I think this idea of objectivity 2.0 really came to be popularized. I mean, the Bush administration's response to Katrina was awful. Now, the motives for that, or if there was a motive for that, you can debate. But for people in New Orleans, for people like me who were there after the storm hit, there was no two ways about that. And I think the fact that we reported that as such without saying but, that's an example where I think it's pretty clear cut. I think another thing is that has helped us is at times we take ourselves very seriously, but at times we don't take ourselves so seriously. And I think having a sense of fun in our journalism has helped. Also, having a sense of transparency to our journalism has helped. One of the most awful days of my professional career was when we wrote that Senator John Edwards was going to drop out of the presidential race in 2008. And this piece was linked everywhere. It led the Drudge Report. It was the crawl on CNN. And then, of course, Senator Edwards walked to the microphone and said he was going to stay in the race. Yeah.
He should have listened to you.
Yeah, right. He should have listened to me, Charles. Thank you. But my point is, we all huddled in my office where they were trying to keep me from jumping out a window and said, you know what, when we started this thing, we said we're going to be transparent. Guess what? We have a real opportunity to be transparent here. So I mostly wrote and edited a very long piece that said in excruciating detail how we got that wrong. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, I think we ended up with more fans than critics at the end of that, where people said, my God, a newspaper that's actually admitted that they made a mistake. And we learned from it. Hopefully readers learned from it. We said after that we didn't want to make our reputation on making mistakes, and hopefully that was one of the few times we would do that. But I think that's another part of this new formula that people are looking for.
As we come to a close here, shortly after we won this Pulitzer Prize, people began to have a little elbowing, not inside the Clarion-Ledger, but outside, about who really deserved the credit for this Pulitzer Prize. The reporters and editors were all willing to give credit to everybody. So I wrote a column a few days afterwards that listed in some detail who this Pulitzer Prize belonged to. And I think we have established once again here today, appropriately, this is William Winter's Pulitzer Prize. This is the Boys of Spring Pulitzer Prize. It's Fred Anklam's Pulitzer Prize. But down deep, we know this is Mississippi's Pulitzer Prize. And so who does it belong to now? It belongs to the future of Mississippi and an inspiration to the future leaders, journalistic and public servants, that education can continue to improve. I thank the panel. I thank all of you for coming today. It's been a terrific event. Thank you for helping us celebrate 30 years.